Hi, thanks for listening to Crafting Human and being part of our creative tribe. If this conversation resonates with you, please share the episode. Liking and subscribing helps me to keep telling the stories of the creatives who bring soul into our world. If you want me to dive deeper on anything discussed today, let me know in the comments. I'd love to bring those conversations to you in future episodes. Now, on with the show. Hello, everyone. Today, I am so honored to welcome Bill Reed. He is a pioneer and visionary in the world of regenerative development, and he is the principal of Regenesis Group and the co-founder of Integrative Design Collaborative. He is also the author of many technical articles and a contributor to many books, including the seminal work Integrative Design Guide to Green Building. Bill is a founding member of the U.S. Green Building Council and a key force behind the launch of the LEED Green Building movement. He has guided hundreds of projects in over 30 countries and spent decades helping communities, cities, and projects move beyond sustainability to regenerate the living systems that we depend on. He's not only an internationally sought after consultant and educator, but he's also a storyteller who invites us to rethink our relationship with the land and to see every building and every community as part of a living, breathing system and to design in ways that give back more than we take. I consider Bill an advocate, a philosopher, a peacemaker, and in many ways, you'll hear that he's also an untier of some of the most complex and complicated knots. He has been an inspiration and a role model to me, and one that is truly living out his calling and place by place, and one life and heart at a time, opening minds to seek and create a future that we all want and can create for ourselves. So, with that, I just want to say give a warm welcome to you, Bill. Thank you for joining. It is truly an honor to have you, uh, contributing your wisdom and insights to this episode of Crafting Human podcast.
Well, thank you, Sharon. That is a very sweet intro. Very nice.
Oh,
Much appreciated.
well, yes, of course. There's so much to talk about here today. And one of the first things I just wanted to do before we begin is to bring forward, from your perspective, a really clear definition of what is regeneration. It is a word that we are hearing a lot these days. And, I think everybody has some little subtle nuances and differences of perspective in how they're using that terminology. And I think for the purpose of our conversation, I'd love to hear your definition and the perspectives that you bring to regeneration.
Right. Well, in the simplest terms, and maybe that's not so simple for many, is that regeneration is simply staying in the game of evolution. And that means, in order to do that, though, requires us to continually be introspective and explore not only the development of life outside of it. And I use development in terms of the process of continual improvement, um, but also development in the terms of its etymology to deveil what is hidden. And so regeneration is not simply restoration, although this is the way many people in the world are using regeneration, is to restore something. And restoration is definitely part of regeneration. But or I should say, and as things evolve, as climate change accelerates, as genetic mutations, which are always present with us, as life changes, we need to be adapting with it. The current paradigm is that we think we can stabilize life. We want everything to be the same. Well, it never is. And in a way, regeneration is just acknowledging what is going on in life. It asks us to participate in it. So the practice of regenerative development and design is to develop the capability to co-evolve. That's pretty much what it comes down, the capability to co-evolve, which means we have to start paying attention and start paying attention in a new way.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I love that because, you know, even as people, individuals, we're constantly evolving and changing, growing and learning, right? And adapting to our environments. So I love that because on a large scale of what you're talking about, I think it's very much something that we can see and reflect in and understand, maybe from our own personal perspective as well. Um, it's really interesting because this conversation, I was so excited to speak with you because I felt like some of the principles of regeneration that you have shared and that I've been following hold so many keys to this really, you know, this very critical kind of time that we're living in. I feel like we're facing some of the most unprecedented challenges, and we're living through when experiencing many breakdowns in systems. And, and there's all these rapid changes that are happening. I feel like every day there's something new we're needing to learn and adapt to. And it's happening at speeds that are really unimaginable. And I was wondering what your thoughts might be in that time. In a time like this, do you feel like we might be living through a bit of a meaning crisis in our culture?
Well, it's certainly a crisis. I don't think it's a bad crisis, actually. Um, and by the way, every 100 or 150 years or so, there's always a crisis similar to this. This is
Mm,
really new, it may be new to us. Um, the real issue, I think, is that what are we going to do about it? And I, I, I think that all of this is leading towards what is inevitable, that the nation states that we think are so important on this planet are actually Achilles' heels. They're too big to manage. I don't want to get into politics, but I'll make an incendiary statement right now. The United States is so large. Based on one book called American Nations by Colin Woodard. We have 11, I think it's 11 different nations, effectively, 11 different essence descriptors. We certainly know the South is different than the Northeast, it's different than New York City, it's different than um, French Canadian, world, the Spanish American world that makes up the United States. The only thing that really holds the United States together in the past is war, if you really think about it. So that's a pretty weak reason for a nation to exist. Now, logically extending that, um, even states are too big to govern, is that our places, and if you look at Dunbar's number, 150 people, but at least we know from Eleanor Ostrom's work that places are manageable, that we actually can heal places. So the scale of place is incredibly important to this discussion of regeneration, because place is what we know, place is what we can love, and what we love we take care of. Everything else is outside of our domain. So the United States is an abstraction. We don't love an abstraction. We may love the fact that we won a war, or that we somehow were united together because of against the King of England, but that isn't enough to hold a country together. But the physical environment, our love of that particular place, what we grew up with, what we feel, what our genetics are invested in, that's compelling. So
yeah.
I don't know. So I apologize for going down to maybe a little bit of a controversial stand, but what the heck? That's what these podcasts are for, right?
Sure. We're making bold statements, right? And I feel like honestly, even the whole idea of regeneration and this whole transformative new paradigm shift in and of itself it's a bit, I don't want to say controversial, but I think it'll push people on the fringes of discomfort, and but one of the things you said that I love is the idea of place, because what really resonates for me on that is that it is small enough of an idea that we can form and assign value and meaning to these things. And that that phrase you use where we protect the things we love, and I know it's like a Jacques Cousteau quote where he says, I'm just going to read here, we only protect what we love, we only love what we understand, and we only understand what we are taught. And,
Yep.
and that kind of idea, I mean, I guess you could say it's a little bit, oh, well, that's a very idyllic, rose colored glasses on sort of a perspective of let's just love and heal place. And it may seem oversimplified, but somehow when I hear your lectures and the conversations you have about how we can foster and nurture that perspective, it just feels, I know it's a simple idea. It's very much more complicated maybe to execute, but the ideas and the principles are very simple. But I'd love for you to maybe take us through what does that look like to from that perspective of loving a place. How do we even begin that journey? And can you take us through maybe what are the first steps for freeing ourselves from these sort of other narratives and moving in a different direction?
Well, the first thing that's required is that people have to be energized about something. If they're not energized, if they're lukewarm, like I could care less, you're not going to get very far. This is not going to be very motivating. But often we are
Hmm.
invited in because people are upset about a development, a real estate development, or they're in love with an ecological system they want to protect. But there's some energetic motivation to engage people. And I particularly like real estate because most developers come along and they propose a design and that nobody's ever asked for. The developer's just making a buck. And people are energized because they don't want to have their community changed. Change is hard.
Yeah. Yeah.
So there's usually so people are upset. And what we come in and do is help people understand the nature of what they love or what they're protecting. And often well, we should be building a park, not a multi-use facility of 1.5 million square feet. Okay, that's a good idea. But another person says something else. Another person says we need a railroad station. Another person says we need a shopping mall. Another person says we need schools. So who's right? And how do you? Well, they all have a caring instinct. So what we do is we say, listen, what we all want is a quality of life, including the developer, by the way. The developer wants as much. They don't want to have a crappy environment to sell their product in. They couldn't. It would devalue it. So everybody wants the same thing. They just don't know how to go about doing it. And so what we do is we actually help the community to understand the potential. And this is a very important word, not the problems, because you can't solve problems. There's thousands of problems. You pick one problem to solve, and three or four other unintended consequences pop up because you're only working on a very isolated thing that's connected. The thing about life works as a whole living system. Everything is connected. We just are unpracticed in holding that whole. So what we do is we help paint a picture of the essence of a place. What's the core? I mean, Sharon, you have a unique essence. I have a unique essence. Everybody does. That's the premise we hold. And I think it's a relatively safe one to hold is that you're a unique composition of biology and spirit and consciousness. And what makes you unique? Well, when I take the time to explore what makes you unique, you feel honored, I'm assuming,
Of
because
course.
that's who you are.
Yeah. Yeah.
You're appreciated. And we do the same thing with the community. We say, who are you as a community, as an
Hmm.
ecosystem? Most people don't think about that because we think about the schools or we think about good transportation or we think about how many hospitals we have and that kind of sets the value of a community. But in fact, it's all of that stuff. The natural systems, the parks, the health of the rivers, um, all of that comes together. So there's a unique pattern of life that identifies that place, just like every place on the planet. New York is different than Boston, is different than Chicago, is different than Los Angeles. So what makes the difference? We know that, but we never really take the time to define it and acknowledge it. And that would be me like saying, well, I want you to be like my other friend. I like my other friend. I don't know you, but I like my other friend. So would you be like her? So that doesn't work. And so what we do is we we help people see that uniqueness. And that takes literally a couple weeks worth of work. It's not very hard. And most people intuitively know it anyway. So all we're doing is we're helping people to see that Ubuntu, what greeting that was popularized in Avatar, I see you. That's a great, beautiful way of expressing relationship. I see you. And so well, that's what we're saying to the community is we see you. And it honors them. And then from there, we can say, well, and what's the potential of this place? Well, go back 100 years, 200 years, even a billion years. You actually could do that. But let's say even 1,000 years. What was this place when it was thriving and flourishing? And in general, we can recover that. Not always, but mostly
Mhm.
we can recover that. Isn't that something we all want to work towards? Now, all these different interest groups, and you have different activist groups in each neighborhood. You have climate change people and habitat connectivity and no plastics in the environment people and recycling people, security people, mobility people. Literally, there are hundreds of groups in every community who are motivated about a particular issue, but they all work in silos. And those silos never talk to each other because they're out fundraising from the same funders. They're battling each other, or their ego is in the way. And so what we
Yeah.
do is we listen. We're all interested in this or we don't say this. We invite them to understand that this flourishing potential of this place is possible. Isn't this what we're all working towards? Well, yeah. How do we do that? Well, we get together and we integrate people. So we integrate these groups and sometimes it's just a couple handfuls of them. We give them lunch and we say, let's start learning from each other. It takes about a year at the pace of community development for people's minds to start shifting. And the first shift that happens is, wait a minute, what are you doing running this meeting to me, right? And to us, we should be running this meeting. Yes, you should. Step right up.
Yeah.
And we'll give you some guidance on how to do that and not waste time, how to accomplish stuff. And also things start getting accomplished, little bits, little achievements. Well, after about the end of 10 months or so, there's an energy field that gets developed in those groups of people. And they say, this is different than everybody else because they're not just trying to jam a development down our throats. They're actually concerned about all of us and all of this place. Maybe we should be talking with them. So more people come and more people come and more people come. And what happens is this energy field gets expanding because we're working on what's meaningful to everybody, or at least 95% of the people. So that's it. That's all you need because now what they've done is they are beginning to fall in love with their place. They're understanding it, Cousteau's statement. We're learning from each other. We're understanding it, and understanding is the beginning of love. And that's a heck of a lot better motivator than fear or a lead checklist.
Yeah. And do you think it's in that process of discovering or maybe rediscovering what they love about the place to be able to kind of be unified in a bigger vision and a bigger future beyond
That's the
just their small.
Yeah, but here's the cool thing is we want them working in their small thing because somebody has to do it. It's not that you don't
Sure.
work on problems. You just need a vessel that unifies all those problem solving so we're working towards the same thing. And the vision is expanded. So we want you people to be working on climate change. We want you people to be working on habitat connectivity or beach erosion or wetland protection or saving the
Yeah.
alligator. It doesn't matter. Um, all of those are important. And now we're beginning to connect them together as a whole because we are working with a core. We've actually assembled a core team holding representatives from those broad sectors. So they're actually hearing from each other. And that begins to create a unified approach that we're all working towards. It sounds
I mean,
simple,
it just sounds so like utopia, to be honest. It just sounds so idyllic and
but it's not.
amazing.
It's just what people want to. We are social animals. We want to do that way. Our government, though, does not know how to operate. So government is. You think, well, this is what the government's for. Yeah, It could be, but they aren't, because government is typically reactionary and politically
Yeah.
oriented. What we're doing is we're creating an aspirational governance that actually works with, it's like a DNA spiral. You want to manage, you need management, you need kind of reactionary government. Snowplow the streets, pick up the garbage, right? We need all that. We also need people that are looking ahead. And
Yeah.
ultimately, we had one project where the mayor did not want to. She commanded her staff not to talk to us because she was perceived as destabilizing and a threat. But a year and a half later, once this group started meeting in the city, she called up and said, "I get it. This is great stuff. We want to help." So it just takes time for that
That's
field to be built.
yeah, that's amazing. What do you think are some of the, maybe, I don't know if you want to call it like a false narrative, or frameworks maybe that we have um kind of either believed or been told to believe or accept, maybe just be resigned to
Well,
accepting that it is what it is? What do you think these things are that limit us from being able to engage with each other and with our, fellow, collaborators in this type of a way?
I think there's two fundamental ones, and one is that we believe that reductionism is the way to work effectively, meaning
Can you
take
define
one
that?
problem at
Yeah.
a time. Science is basically saying let's narrow down the field so that we can solve problems there, because that's easy to solve problems that way. The
Mhm.
financial industry calls it exponential discounting. You discount everything else and you focus on one thing. Well, that's you may solve the problem from a short-term standpoint, but long-term, you've created more problems. So look at the environmental movement. We've had 50 years we've been working on this stuff in a very fragmented way. LEED is a fragmented solution. The SDGs are fragmented. I mean, all the petals are fragmented, even though we acknowledge that they're all integrated. We work in it. We work in it. Take one thing at a time and address it. And how are we doing? It's only getting worse. 50 years of this work, and it's only getting worse. So there, I'll put that out as proof that it doesn't work. But
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
other side is that, I mean, it's not really proof because you need time for this stuff to happen. But 30 years generally is enough to change a culture. We have not struck the right note, and I think we've struck the wrong note. That we've struck is that we're working from fear. We're working from that nobody is being told the potential, the opportunities. We're saying we're going to die. Well, most people don't even want to acknowledge that.
Yeah.
So it gets no traction. The Clinton administration in I guess it was the 90s, did studies on the word sustainability, and 95% of the people surveyed hated the word. The word they liked was health. So even our branding is stupid. But our branding also is scarce, is again scarcity oriented, because sustainability means the way we practice it as let's reduce the damage. How does reducing the damage motivate anybody? It means, as Bill McDonough says, sustainability is a slower way to die. That's it's
So good.
subliminally.
Yeah.
Okay, so the other side of this is the scarcity mentality that I need mine. And the United States, by the way, is here's a sobering thing. The United States is the least interested country in our work,
Oh,
and I think
really?
oh
Really?
yeah,
Oh my.
we rarely work in the United States, and
Wow.
I think that's because of the cowboy mentality we have. We're independent cusses. We had our genes. Our relatives came over. They're independent thinkers, and also not interested in community. New England is the only place that has really been settled with community at its heart. The Puritans came over and they set up a schoolmaster and a minister in each community. And New England is relatively coherent. And look at the blue states versus the red. It's wonderful. I mean, even health. I mean, New England's right now is gathering together to create a health insurance collective because of the lack of leadership from the federal government. So New Englanders have a different perspective, but the rest of the country, and even New England, we're all kind of don't bother me. I'm in my own little castle, and
Yeah,
and the
very
politics.
an individualistic kind of a mindset that definitely I agree because after having lived outside of the US, for a number of years, living and working, and also myself coming from, a Korean, um, kind of from a Korean family where we are very much, you know, communal in how we live and value family and community with each other, and we use community to help support each other, right? It definitely is a different cultural mindset, maybe is,
Yep,
kind of one
yep.
of those things. Yeah.
I don't know how
Um,
did we get down that? I'm sorry, I went down took us down a
well,
rabbit
no,
hole.
well, and I think part of that was because of the question of like, what are the kind of the narratives and maybe the incomplete
Yeah.
frameworks or the
So
frameworks that have been established that, yeah, that
let me
have
finish that. One,
these
the
are the frameworks that have, yeah. Okay, sorry, go ahead.
scarcity mentality, right? I have to protect what's mine. Don't come near me. Um,
Hmm.
I'm the only guy that's going to take care of myself. That kind of thing.
Yeah,
So we lack a cooperative spirit, which means with each other, and if we don't have it with each other, we're not going to have it with life.
yeah. And and you say that the US is one of the places where you are not working as much as in the outside in the other, in other regions. But even still, I'm sure when you've gone into those places, there's still been that the maybe the mental hurdle and, there's the journey of going from where you once were thinking to this whole transformative paradigm shift. It still needs
Oh
to
yeah,
happen, right? So
oh yeah.
what are the kinds of things that unlock that ability to be able to adopt that new mindset?
Well, that's a great question, and we I don't know if it was a manipulation, but it was sneaking this stuff in. I would sneak this kind of work in on our projects. People would hire us for a green building and say, well, remember one project they asked, we want to do a LEED gold building. And I asked them, do you want LEED or do you want sustainability? Because there's a difference. And they said, oh yeah, we want both, which was a cool answer. But then we had to
Yeah,
actually help them understand that their building was part of a larger context. And what I
yeah,
mean by that is that one was a grocery store where we had to help them understand that the food system was really more important ecologically than the building. And so we worked on reestablishing a local food system as integral to the project. They didn't ask for that. In fact, they were actually quite upset. And it took them about a year before they realized, oh, that's right. That's what we need to be doing.
yeah,
So these
yeah.
paradigm shifts are tough for people. And as I say, it's not a great business model, but it's very effective. But being fired and then being rehired, we've always been rehired. We've been fired a number of times, and we've been rehired too because people think about it.
Sure.
But
Wow.
uh, hmm? Well,
Well, I
so
was just gonna
go on.
I wanted to maybe go back to that. uh, When you're going through this experience with them and, they're upset with what you're sharing, and they're like, that's not why we hired you. How did that make you feel the first time you heard that? And how did you think, oh gosh, maybe we're wrong, maybe we're not onto
No,
something?
I have never. This may sound arrogant, but I've never felt we're wrong. I felt like maybe we didn't communicate what's important. It's more of a
Okay.
communication issue. And one
Okay.
client, as he was firing me, said, "My minister doesn't get away with saying the shit you say, Bill." And then he let us go. But a year later, he hired us for many more projects. We worked with him for many years because
Wow.
this is transformational for people, and it's hard. It's a hard pill to swallow. Um, Now, however, the field has changed. It is getting easier. More and more people are asking about this work. More and more people are realizing that the ways we've been doing things just don't work. So why not give it a try?
Right.
And now,
Yeah.
in fact, I just negotiated a contract last 2 weeks ago where I told the client, um, a very, very wealthy and well-established developer, I said, regeneration requires, you don't know, but we're going to tell you, regeneration requires an ongoing rebirth of relationship. Like every year, you got to think about how do we do and how do we improve. We are not going to be here for the duration of the life of this project. We'll be dead. You're going to be here, and your kids are going to be here, your staff are going to be here. What is most important about this is that you need to understand this work. And so this is a very expensive education process for you. Not only are we going to help you with your project, but the most important deliverable is that you and the community are able to regenerate. And
That's
so,
so that's so
so
profound.
we are we are right up front with that now, and people are saying, "Okay, I get it." In fact, we have our first meeting in a week with this client to get it moving. So the cool thing is that people say, "Yeah, that sounds important," and I can assure you, 30 years ago, most people would not have gotten that.
That must be so encouraging for you to see
Yeah,
this
it
shift
is.
that's happening in a time where, I mean, I don't know, what was that like for you? Like, do you ever, how do you maybe the better question is, how have you overcome the constant no's or the resistance and the pushback and, and stay kind of being this voice of hope and
Yeah.
possibility and inspiration?
Well, that's flattering to think that. I guess I don't feel like I have a choice, Sharon. I think that,
Mhm.
I mean, I started doing this work in 1974, 75 with passive solar energy, and people rejected that. I said, why would you reject that? It's free energy, but it's just different. So I remember being
Yeah,
incredibly upset that I couldn't. This perfectly logical approach to design wasn't accepted. And then we went to
yeah,
LEED, whole building, and then we went to integrated systems design. Where do we stop integrating? That becomes a metaphysical question. And then regeneration, that basically embraces consciousness. Our tagline is we partner people with their places to regenerate ecosystems and the human spirit. So we're very upfront about this is a journey of consciousness. And and yeah, most people kind of roll their eyes, but pretty quickly I realized that you can't force people to change. You need to, and so my approach has been writing and speaking, mostly speaking, just getting out there in front of people. And there's typically one or two people in every audience that says, "Would you talk? Can we talk to you about that?" Yeah, that's how it's grown. So I don't try to convince people to change. There are enough, and now there are enough people that want to change that it's not hard anymore.
yeah. So, can we maybe go back to this idea of essence? Um, because what you're talking about is, uh, understanding the essence of place. But I remember in some conversations we've had that that work also starts from on an individual level too. And, what what can we be doing in some maybe practical terms? How can people begin this journey for themselves? And I know Regenesis Group also has cohorts and classes and things, but are there maybe some key points that you can bring up and take us through that would allow, you know, maybe the first domino and the first ripple to start in a new way of thinking and embracing this?
Yeah, it's tough because people actually have to stop solving problems and start realizing they've got to be working in multiple areas at once, and that's tough to do on your own. So we do have classes. We do have shorter classes, and longer classes. I don't want to make this an advertisement about the institute, but
Hmm.
it's open to anybody. The
Hmm.
Regenesis Institute for Regenerative Development and Design. But and there are other people teaching similar, not the same, but similar courses around the world. I would say that the first thing that any community member needs to do is to understand the essence of their place. And because what makes your place different than the next town? I live in eastern Massachusetts. My town is Arlington. I live next to Lexington and Concord, the Revolutionary War, right? Massachusetts Avenue, where the whole first number of days of battle are literally 400 yards from my house. And yet these towns are significantly different. And we never ask that, well, what makes it different? How do we honor that difference? And instead of being generic, why would we accept planning and design to borrow stuff from San Francisco, let's say, and implant it here? So the whole idea of, and not just every town talks about sustainability, but what are you sustaining? Are you sustaining the unique aspects of life here, or are you just doing generic efficiency, like reducing carbon, reducing cleaning water? All that's important, but it's insufficient unless it's associated with the nature of your home. So how do you fall in love with your home? You have to know your home. That's the first
Yeah.
step.
Yeah.
The other step, of course, is you can we call this three lines of work in our practice. But three lines of work is that self, group, and system. So we want to improve the system, but it takes a group of people to do it. We don't do things as individuals in our culture. Nobody does. We're social animals. We need a team of people, an organization of stuff to get effective stuff done. And then there's the individual. Now, reversing that, if I'm a jerk, and I've certainly been known to be a jerk, we're all jerks at time, right? I'm not going to be very effective working in a group. So what we ask group members to do is reflect on who you need to be, and we give them some resources to do that, to maybe not be a jerk in the group. You can be a jerk at home if you want to be. You can be a jerk with that, but in this group, you can't be a jerk. So, or we invite people not to be a jerk. And so you're working. So we're actually getting people to reflect on, well, gee, maybe I am a jerk. Maybe I need to actually calm down and not be so impatient, right? There, I'm now less of a jerk, and that makes the group work a lot better. The group has to work on their skill set to work effectively together. That's what organizational development skills are about. Very important, and there are people how to facilitate that. In service of what though? What gives you the will to actually get together and do this work is that you need to understand the nature of the system. And that gets right back to the essence of the system. We do something we call a story of place to help people experience the uniqueness of their town and ecosystem. And that storying process is not just telling a narrative, it's actually engaging people in a collaborative unfolding and understanding. Like we come in and we do initial research. We just do desktop research, computer research, maps, etc. We're looking for patterns that keep repeating themselves that make this place identifiably unique. And then we meet with people and we say, "This is our understanding. Is that what's going on here?" And they say, "No, you don't have it quite right. Here's what's really going on." Oh, that's so cool. So we take that back, we process it a bit, we come back with a refined understanding. We go back to the same people and we say, here's what we figured out. Here's what we're learning. And they say, okay, you got that right, or nope, you're still wrong. Here's where now the story doesn't matter. What matters more is that we're in relationship with each other. We're working
Yeah.
now with community members to actually collaboratively discover something. And that's the pattern. That's the most important pattern. So, in a way, the story of place is a proxy for relationship building in a positive way. I'm pissed off that you're building this building. We want to change. That doesn't go very far. But out of that, now we can talk about what the community needs in terms of this development. And by the way, this is what we tell the developers. The only thing, these are the developers who hire us. We say to them, the only thing you deserve is a fair profit. That's it. You do not deserve to tell the community what is going to get built. Now, the community has to acknowledge that the developer deserves a fair profit because he or she is taking a big risk. Therefore, we have to harmonize the developer's profit, nature, and the nature of community. And we've never seen that fail. Never seen that fail.
Wow. How when the I'd love to hear when you have said that to developers, um, is their first what's their first response like?
Well, one developer I remember saying to me, because they'd already done the master, they'd worked 3 years on the master plan, and he said, "Well, you're not going to make us change the master plan, are you?" I said, "I'm not going to make you do anything. You're going to want to when we're done." And that
Mhm.
actually was an intimidating answer for him because he realized, oh, this is going to take some work. I have to rethink. This isn't just hiring Regenesis to make it better. This is, I have to be engaged in this. Um, we work with a developer out of New York City who they do this on their own. When they buy property, they sit on it for a year to 2 years and they spend the time getting to know the community. They don't propose a development at all. They set up a storefront office. They spend time meeting the business owners, the residents, developing a relationship. And they get approvals, just that, not even talking about the ecology like we do. With that, they get approvals, land use approvals, where no developer has ever gotten an approval before. In fact, they're being consulted now to do zoning work for other towns
That's
because their
amazing.
process is respect. Again, this is not hard stuff. It means, but you have to stop thinking that you're in control because you're
Right,
never in. So they
right.
acknowledge we're not in control. Let's figure it out together. And as a result, and their comment to me was, and they meant this in good spirit, we laugh all the way to the bank. We don't know why other developers don't do this. We make so much more money because you don't have to have
Yeah.
lawyers. You don't lose time. Their time to market is so much fast. Time for approvals is so much faster. Why wouldn't you do? No,
Mm.
Tyson Young. Sorry, I'm just kind of on a roll now. But
No, I love
Tyson Young,
this, I love this.
Tyson Yunkaporta in his book Sand Talk talks about one of his aunties teaching him that a framework for working with community is respect, connect, reflect, direct. So what his auntie said is, well, what Western people do is they reverse that. They direct, then people are angry, then
Oh, wow.
then they reflect, say, yeah, what did we do wrong? Well, we hired the lawyers and we are taken to court. Then we connect because now we're negotiating through lawyers, but that's expensive and time consuming. And then finally, there's respect. But you've wasted 5 years. Why not just
So
reverse that?
true. That is
So this is,
so
yes,
true.
about relationship building. We don't need to make this mysterious, Sharon. This is simply
Yeah.
about, but this is where essence to essence comes in. This work can all be summarized as essence to essence relationship. I need to be respecting your essence. If I assume you are anybody else than you are, I'm what? I'm colonizing you, right? I'm forcing you to. I'm putting you in a box that you shouldn't be in. And your role with me is to respect who I am and collaboratively, and we're collaboratively discovering, wow, you're pretty cool, and Bill, you're pretty cool. Well, we may not necessarily get married, but there's respect there, right? And so it's the same thing with an ecosystem. What's the essence of that ecosystem? We need to be honoring that. That ecosystem needs to be honoring what the social system needs because humans are part of nature. We just can't destroy nature. So how do we actually build housing without destroying? How do we actually build housing in a way that accelerates and expands the health of these ecosystems? And if we're not doing that, pardon me, we're screwed. And then once we start doing that, when people say, "Well, we need more housing," yes, we also need to stop flooding cities. That the jobs need to go elsewhere. It's going to ask us. It's going to cause us to ask other questions than we're asking now. The fragmented problem solving is we need housing, so we're just going to build housing everywhere. Screw the river, screw the wetland, because that's what's more important right now. Well, no, the wetland is actually more important. So how do we build and where do we build to actually honor what nature, what the lungs of nature, which is our support system? We just never take the time to think that far. All right, I'm sorry, I'm on a ramble here, so
No, I love it because everything, I mean, what you're shining a light on is, to your point, so simple, but you're right, and and what were the 5 principles you were mentioning? And I'm just blanking on
Oh,
my
respect, connect, reflect, direct.
that it's so simple, and yet, and by even just flipping that order, right, we have created, just a jam every single step of the way for ourselves and made it harder for ourselves. And so much of that is, to your point, like a culture, establishing kind of even a mindset and a culture of honor and respect. And I mean, in very simple terms, to your point, you just, if you don't do that with your fellow humanity, right? And this is where you start seeing all these people who just can't, the conversation just shut down and dialogue is shut down. And but having said that, how have you guided people through these conversations that require harmonization, where you don't necessarily want to compromise what you want, but I mean,
That's
it's
not,
just it's such
yeah. We're not compromising. We are harmonizing. And harmonizing means each side gets more than they ever thought they would have gotten before. And that
oh
people
my
think
gosh,
that
can
that's
you say that again?
so typically, and we use the law of three as a way of describing this. The law of three basically says all life can be seen as an activating force. You want to build a building, and a restraining force, nature, gravity, budget, permits, land use, whatever, NIMBYism. And what we have a tendency to do is we transact, we compromise. Oh, I'll give up 2 stories of my building. I'll give up, 20,000 square feet of buildable area, and nature only has to give up half of the wetland.
Yeah.
And that's compromise, and we call that a day. So it's a lose lose. I lose profit, nature loses, we all lose. Nature doesn't work that way. Nature works with potential. So basically, is that it's always harmonizing around potential. What can be, not what are the problems, because you cannot solve the thousands and thousands of problems that are facing us. It's impossible. I'm just going to make a statement. It is impossible to solve problems and get anywhere. We have to work on the potential of life. So that's always top of mind. And when you harmonize around potential, each side can get ahead. I'll give you lots of examples, but I'll give you one. The classic one is Playa Viva with the developer David Leventhal. And
Yeah.
yeah, have I told you this story? I think I have. But
No, but I actually just spoke with him, so I'd love to hear your perspective on
oh,
that.
good. Well, so the first time we visited the site, we were hired, and the hill that David was going to be building his originally 75 casitas on turned out, we discovered, to be an Aztec pyramid. It
Oh
was all
my
covered with trees.
gosh.
So
Okay.
yeah, that was pretty easy. You were literally walking through 3 feet of clay shards. Um, so no building there. So David said, "Well, we got to move. Got to move the casitas down to the barrier dune." And we said, "No, you're not. Not on our watch. You're not, because you build anything on a barrier dune, the minute there's a storm surge, the sand just dissolves around the foundations, the hard edged foundations, which would have destroyed ecosystems, the land, et cetera. So I said, we can't be associated with that, David. We're going to have to recuse ourselves from this project. And David said, but Bill, you said you could harmonize anything. I expect I expect this to be harmonized. And he
Uh-huh.
was right. I did say that. So I said, gulp. All right, let's go to work. So we had a meeting, and we figured out that, well, the area was filled with palm trees, and turns out that palm trees are grass. You can easily transplant them. So there were already palm trees on this barrier dune. Why don't we transplant more of these and make them foundations for the tree houses? So instead of building casitas on the ground, build them a meter off the ground, supported by the palm trees. And so the barrier dune gets stronger, not weaker, because of the root system, even though small that they are, the root system of the palm trees. David makes more money because it's cool being in a palm tree
Treehouse.
treehouse.
Yeah.
And and the storm surge goes underneath the tree house, so it's protects the structure. And
Yeah.
oh, it sways a little in the wind, right? So that's even more cool. You charge more money,
Uh-huh.
so you make more money. The barrier good is improved, and the buildings are protected. So in three ways, it was harmonized, right? Better
Yeah.
results. That's an
Yeah.
example of organization.
That's amazing. And I want to go back to what you said, in creating harmony that everybody's getting more than what they wanted. And I just wanted to bring that up again because it just doesn't seem believable, you know?
Yeah,
And what I'm gathering from what you're saying is a lot of this just takes time.
no,
And
it does.
I'd love for you to talk about sort of how this regenerative way of, for the purpose of our conversation of development and designing and um, how it sort of flips the concept of the immediate ROI a little bit maybe upside down and that can you talk about maybe some of the time frames it takes to see meaningful results?
Yeah, it's pretty fast actually. The fact there's we don't have enough statistics to make this a really bona fide claim, but on an average, we see ourselves decreasing time to market, meaning approvals, by about 18 months. That's worth a lot of money. So this work actually saves money. And you work in an integrated process with the green buildings. We typically build LEED Platinum at about 2% less than CapEx. Plus, you'll reduce operating costs. So you're actually winning in multiple arenas. But people
Wow.
say, well, uh, yeah, I mean, it's true. And yet developers say, well, tell me exactly what you're going to do for our project. Well, we can't tell you anything that we're going to do because we don't know the dynamics of community, of ecosystem, even of your organization. We can't tell you what we're going to do. We can tell you that we will go through a methodical process and things will continue to merge. And this means that you're not in, basically, then that means I'm not in control. People are feeling, right? I'm supposed to be in control. Are you ever in control? You are never, I'll just make this 100% statement. You are never in control. You think you
So
are, but
true. Yeah,
life
so
has
true.
too many variables, and yet we are trained to think that we're in control. And I mean, engineers who are trying to stabilize nature, building concrete walls, and we think that's control. No, no, it's just slowing down death. That's all, because nature will always win. So why not work Aikido like with nature on its own terms? It'll be a lot easier. That is an act of faith that is very hard for many people who are trained in our culture to take. I was working in Chile on a project, and the CEO of a very large corporation who had hired us was standing next to me. We had gotten to know each other pretty well, and there was a meeting, uh, and I changed the agenda because the energy in the room was shifting. It was just not the meeting that we had designed. And he said, "Bill, what are you doing? You're changing changing the agenda." He said, "Yes, aren't you in charge?" I said, "Are you kidding me? I'm not in charge. This is we're surfing energies here."
Yeah.
And then I turned to him and I said, "Are you in charge? Do you actually think?" And he blinked, blinked, blinked. I had to think about that. So we live in a fiction. Our system, you got to find the leverage points, and typically a building, building construction is a great leverage point. That's why I like real estate
Yeah.
development. It really gets people excited and energized, good or bad. And and you can't, like I said, you can't work with lukewarm. You want people to be negatively enthused, negatively energized, or positively energized. That you can work with. But people will just say, well, whatever, go home. It's not worth. They don't care. You're not going to be able to influence anything effectively. So I love
That
it when
is
people.
well, I that's so surprising to me that you say, but it absolutely makes sense. It's surprising, but it absolutely makes sense that whether it's negatively energized or positively energized, you normally would you kind of sometimes don't want to engage with the people who have all this negative energy. But on the flip side of that, it's because they're so passionate about
They,
maybe,
they care. They
yeah,
may
they
and they may
care.
and they may be right, right? I mean, who knows? But uh, it's important to get all those voices in the air. What we do is we offer a structure and a way to organize this complex thinking. That's the art of our work. Is that the frameworks that we use actually allow us to manage that complexity.
Um, it is so powerful what you are talking about. It's powerful on so many levels, individually. I mean, and then the ripple effect on projects, our culture, our society. It's really um, it's so life giving. Literally, it is a life giving process as well. And I um, I mean, every time we engage in a conversation or I hear a lecture from you or a recording, I just always have so much to learn. And um, but what you're talking about is truly what this podcast has been. What was the inspiration for my podcast is in this world that feels like we're losing touch with our humanity. What you're doing is bringing life, like you're injecting this new way of bringing life and allowing humanity to create a world in their place that feels like it's thriving and it's flourishing, and it's doing that alongside what at one point may have been all these competing interests, including our planet. And I love that. Do you have any stories of some major transformations you've seen that have really inspired you, and you always look
Hmm.
back on it and thinking, I never thought I really thought this was going to be the one where we weren't going to be able to do it, and it just something clicked.
Well,
And
yeah, I do. We have lots of those stories actually, but I particularly love. We worked on a multi-billion-dollar wastewater treatment plant in Vancouver, and the first one was about $1 billion plant, and their objective was saving the taxpayer money.
okay.
And John Becker and I were working together as a team, another colleague of mine, and we said, "Wow, that's a terrible objective, saving the taxpayer money. There's nothing positive about it." And there was the environmental goals built into that, but that was the primary purpose. No one enters a project. Profit is everything deserves to have a profit. So money is really kind of a neutral thing.
Yeah.
Nature works on a profit. Nature works with high margins, and so and we they were interested in integrative systems design because they were managing a 135 person design team with 15 staff members, so 150 people on these charrettes, and it's something we know
Wow.
how to do. So we managed. We'll make a long story short. They also said we might be interested in regeneration, and when I explained it to them, their eyes glazed over, and they said, "Just do the integration stuff." So we knocked a lot of our work in anyway, to the point where conceptually they were working with essence thinking, and
Yeah.
they didn't know it, but they were. And then at the end, we had saved 98% of the change orders. We had brought in the project 18 months faster than expected. 98% of the change order budget, 18 months faster. Um, every first unanimous vote, one of the first unanimous votes on infrastructure projects in British Columbia history. And every engineering firm and architecture firm that participated in the project said it was the greatest project they'd ever worked on. Now,
Wow.
no, that wasn't because it was so
Wow.
beautiful. It was because they were in a new way of being in a relationship. That's what made it meaningful to them. This is what we really long for.
Yeah.
Now, this is because of that experience. This is the same team was hired for the next wastewater treatment plant in Vancouver, and we were leading it. The first meeting, the director stands up and he says, "The purpose of this plant is to save the orca whales." Now, remember the first one was save the taxpayer monies? Now he was saying this is about saving the orca whales. So this guy and his organization
Wow.
made the commitment, the understanding that the system is what's important, and how do we serve that system? And that's a gigantic
Yeah.
shift. And that's a kind of a cool story, I think.
That is, there's so much there. It's so remarkable. I mean, to even get to navigate through 150 people, was that
Yeah.
150 people design team,
Yeah, yeah.
and bring everybody to this shared consensus and agreement of
Well,
the bigger
we had
picture?
we developed a very powerful purpose statement, and it was kind of the project manager was not really into it. The first project manager was really into it. The second project manager, he just needed to build a wastewater treatment plant. The orca whales, well, that'd be a nice thing. So we had a purpose statement though that was incredibly deep about basically stewarding the health of this ecosystem in an ongoing way forever.
Mhm.
The chief technology officer, innovation technology officer, it was a year and a half later. We were still, these are long projects, right? Year and a half later, he stands up in a meeting. He says, "WTF? What are we doing here? This purpose statement has we've had this in front of us for a year and a half, and nobody's taking this really seriously. WTF? Let's get our act together." Boom. So just the fact that we had done that, we had worked it, we couldn't convince them anymore. It had to come from within. And when it came from within the organization, people said, okay. And then it began a transformation. So it does take time. It does take faith that you can only lead a horse to water. You can't make him drink, right? So this
Yeah.
work is indirectly helping people experience life on its own terms and being true to that mission. So what I'm most proud about our work is that we maintain a being state that allows this stuff to emerge. We don't get pissed off. I mean, true, we get frustrated, and I whine a lot. That's one of my techniques is whining, but it seems to work. And
Are you the squeaky wheel in the process, Bill?
I can be, but typically that only works so far.
I just
So,
can't
so
imagine that.
oh yeah, trust me. So anyway, that you just have to stay true. You have to hold to your course,
Yeah.
and you have to manage your state to allow that course to unfold. That's the hard work. That's why we say this work is mostly about you being and becoming. This is a being and becoming process. This is metaphysical work ultimately. Whatever your spiritual tradition, I don't care. But what this is it requires introspection and managing your state of being so that you can work through the thrashings and destabilization that happens when you're presenting this new stuff to others.
This is just so, I mean, this is so profound. I I'm speechless, honestly, because what you're painting a picture of is a reality that we can all be experiencing,
Mhm.
and a way in which we can all be living out who we are and our unique talents and gifts and skill sets that we can be bringing into the world, um, and and really kind of at this very kind of critical moment in our time, having a way forward that is proven over and over again that it can succeed, and it is a way forward for how we create the future and life long after we're gone, in a way that the next generations can be also thriving. It's really, you know on a very deep level, it's so moving. And I wanted to, just say, really, I wanted to say thank you for giving us your time and, sharing with the world. Again, you're just continually, steadfastly been sharing this message with anybody who'll listen. And I hope, much like what happened with me when I first came across these principles, it really changed. It kind of felt like I took, is it the red pill, the blue pill? I can never remember from the Matrix, but it's like once you
That-
see, but once you see, you can't unsee, and once you know, you can't unknow it. And I really hope, um, somebody who's listening to this in the future will say, "I need to be a part of this," and just encouraging one life and one heart at a time. That not to be hopeless, right? That we're and I want to wrap it up with just some of the things that you've just so many gems of life words that you spoke, that we're working from a place of love. We're protecting the things we love. We are working from an abundance mindset and not a scarcity mindset, that we're harmonizing and everybody's getting more than what they want. All of these principles are so huge, and they can fill us up to overflowing, that none of us have to be living and operating from this fear of lack, right? And protectionism. And um, I just am so, so grateful that you were able to join us today and truly show us some pictures of how we can be crafting a much more human world. And thank you so much, Bill.
Well, thank you, Sharon. It's an honor to be with you. I appreciate
Yeah.
it. I appreciate your receptivity to these things and our relationship over the years. So keep on
Yeah.
going.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much, Bill. I appreciate you and your time.
Sure. See you later.
Thanks for listening. If this episode spoke to you, I'd love for you to join our creative tribe. Follow, like, and subscribe to help this community grow. Your support helps me to tell the stories of the creatives who bring soul to our world and create meaningful experiences. Thank you for being here and keeping the circle of creativity alive and connected. I'm so grateful to each and every one of you.